Welcome to a new episode of WAKAAN TV, where today we're going to be talking about our label SSKWAN, the history leading up to it, why we decided to pull the trigger on starting yet another label. All right, awesome. All engines are go. So today we want to talk about the SSKWAN record label.
Yeah,
That is our newer label, and try to dive into the reasons for starting it and what our visions and goals are for said label.
yeah. I think a lot of people know, obviously, that we have Wakan, and Wakan is like predominantly bass music, party music. I mean, there's a lot of different genres that we've covered within those realms, but Sasquan is seemingly the flip side of that.
And interestingly enough, that wasn't really the case, or at least my thought process when pulling the trigger on starting Wakan. The interesting part is, I think, at least for myself, starting Wakan, I mean, it came when we've talked about this before. The reasons for starting it, wanting to do more for the community, um, helping building artists, and also having a home for all this obscure multi-genre music. But interestingly, when we first started Wakan, both of us actually were very adamant that we did not want it to become another hard tear out dubstep label.
Yeah.
So if you listen to the first Wakan releases, they're actually sort of similar to what we
Yeah.
put out on Saskwan.
There's a lot
But
of
it,
mid tempo and
but I think it just
electronica.
when Wakan was started and in the time following that, well, I was producing all these different genres. We also found people who were onto something, and in the process, I don't want to say that, and maybe more like all these people together somehow created a new, fresh take on a sound. At least I don't want to take big words in our mouth that we discovered or invented some genre, but we, for some reason or another, it became like a subset of bass music, freeform bass music.
Yeah.
But that wasn't really the thought in starting Wakanda. It's just something that gradually happened.
Yeah.
And then let's not forget, for the more danceable music, that's maybe a little more formulaic, but more than anything else, it's hard hitting, and it's got the ramps and it's got the hard drops. Um it has a more established, uh, what can you say, like a more established platform and structure for shows and touring.
Yeah.
Whereas the down tempo, and this is probably something we're going to dig into way more during this episode, but the down tempo music, maybe by it being more subtle and relaxing, it doesn't get as much attention,
Yeah.
at least not in America right now. I mean, I know because I would gladly go play shows with both, and I get booked way more for playing
Yeah, I
party
think
music.
I think like, anytime you have something like with Wakan, like when we started that label, at least from from where I was sitting, my vantage point, what I saw was trying out a lot of different genres, trying to um, just simply be a vessel for people to release music. And then you get into the finer nuances of like as a label, then you're required to say, okay, well, um, how can we make this as successful as we can? And I think because of that, we had in the early days a lot more success with releasing records and getting press and the marketing and driving traffic for giving artists a cause to tour from being able to release records. And then I remember when we put out Baba Tunde with Peekaboo and G-Rex. I think I went to Lost Lands and I stopped counting it how many times I heard it that weekend at like 19 times. And so it served releasing that served a function to be able to get our artists and spotlight and limelight.
Absolutely.
And I think kind of as that label matured, um, we started getting notoriety for being able to release like underground, cutting edge bass music. But I I don't think when WAKAAN started, the whole goal was to be like, yeah, this is going to be dance floor music. It was, we just want to be mere vessels to help further artists' careers in this very broad genre. But then, look, anytime you have something that has artists attached to it that are perceivingly doing well, you need to be able to wrap your head around it in an elevator pitch, if you will. Well, what does it sound like? It sounds like this. Oh, okay. That makes it so that the a person can understand and wrap their head around what they're getting into. It sounds like this mixed up and put it in a blender. That's what it is. With what we do, it's a little more left of center, obviously, but it's still, there's those components to make people understand. And then as we progress, we're like, well, we don't want to just be that. We think, and as we started, we thought we could release anything from heavier bass stuff to trappier stuff to futury stuff to electronica to chill out, experimental, tonal sounds. Even we thought we could just simply do it all, but we also realized that we had to be able to then on the flip side be able to market this thing that we were selling for these artists and helping them kind of grow towards. So we kind of had to almost in a roundabout way put it in a box so it made cohesive sense to a consumer.
For sure.
And that I think is where we definitively came up with this will be this will be this.
Well, there are a couple of more things to say about it because it's interesting. Because yes, we started off like that, and I've always been sort of naive when it comes to these things. I want to do everything. I mean, I want the festival to be full of jam bands and ethnic music, and not just I always try to think big like that. But one thing is for sure, when you start doing something, and like you said, we had a lot of success with like the sort of deep, gnarly, freeform bass, very
Yeah.
hard hitting but clean production. Well, now when you start doing that, you're gonna attract more people doing the same thing. So that's
Yep.
also one aspect that turns out that there are a lot of very, very talented people sitting here in the corners making this similar stuff or starting to make it, and so we got a lot of material,
Yeah.
which in turn was the time when you actually approached me and said, hey, you're going to think this is crazy, but I think we should start it. That was actually your idea to start SSKWAN, and that also had to do with that you are primarily responsible for the scheduling.
Yeah.
So we actually came up with a situation where we just simply didn't have more slots, and
Right.
now you run into something where you're wanting the best for everyone and you're taking on too much. So now every artist has to wait for months and months to get catered to, and that creates resentment. And
Yep.
so, despite our best effort, we even came into a slump where it's like, wow, we cannot even take care of all these people that want to work with us.
Yeah, and,
And
and, and they were great artists and great records.
yeah,
And it's funny that you say that because like now it's jogging my memory. I remember exactly, and I think I told you this, but I remember exactly like when it was because I also used the reference. I had just talked to Josh Figure when he was touring with Crisley, and he signed to Skrillex's
the Oslam.
Ausla label,
Ausla.
and I asked him, I was like, dude, you signed so long ago. When's your record coming out? He's like, oh, next year. It's been a year and a half. And, look, that's a huge entity or was a huge entity
But that's what
of
happens.
its own. And it was simply because they had so much stuff chocked full of cool releases that
You get backlogged.
they get backlogged. And that we were starting to have that happen. And I was starting to have these very long-winded conversations trying to explain to people why we couldn't receive a record and then put it out a month later.
Yep.
And they're like, hold on, how long? You're like, and look, there's still even other labels I talked to today for some of my clients, and we'll be talking about releases. And it's like, Yeah, we're in March of next year, and it's
Yeah.
just like, look, that's great, but at the same time, as an artist manager, which I am first and foremost, I mean, that's a very discouraging conversation to go back to your client and say they want to do it, but we're going to put it out of March of next year. And they're
And
like, we're in June or, whatever it is, So that's, I mean, I think a lot of that came from needing to have more of like a decisive split to understand that ways that we can help service and vehicle, like be a better vehicle for some of these artists, where like if it fell into certain elements and categories, we did it on this label and then had a whole different schedule available to be able to kind of service some of these other
yes,
sounding records.
and this might not be obvious for everyone who's listening, but as an artist too, having a release come out a certain time of year and that coincide with your touring plans and maybe a little merch release. I mean, that's how we work, trying to maximize
Yeah.
attention by pooling things. So not getting a release out in a proper timeline is very bad. It's very
Yeah.
problematic. And then for us, having the other hat on as a record label executive makes me feel really bad,
Yeah.
and sort of again, you have to explain to people over and over again why things take longer, and it's never a good feeling.
Yeah.
So eventually we were, if we're gonna be able to take on this amount of work and actually also release down tempo music, electronica, chill out, whatever you want to call it,
Mm-hmm.
we need this new set of wheels where
Yeah.
we can pretty much double our release schedule.
Yeah.
And let's not forget too that even though I am, highly involved in WAKAAN, I am not hands on with those things. It's you and Chloe mostly that do
Yep.
the scheduling. So your work has still doubled,
Yep.
I don't know any people who work as hard as we do, and you and Chloe included, because that's such a puzzle to try to figure out.
It is, it's definitely. I think I use this term a lot, but it's definitely a labor of love. But it comes from wanting to genuinely help, and I think that like you know we're getting to a place where we're having to be a little bit more selective about what we sign and what we do, and how frequent we put out stuff. I mean, like during the pandemic, we were putting out 2 to 3 records a week in between both labels, and now we've scaled back a lot. And just because like we have 3 tours out currently, we have a festival, a whole slew of merchandise that we're working at. We just don't have the availability to be able to take that much on, which has made it so that we have to, if we're going to do something and try to put our name on it, we try to make it as great as possible. And if you take on too much, things start to suffer.
Yeah, I mean, let's not, you are also artist manager for Taboo and Champagne Drip, the two other tours that
Yep.
Wakan also sponsors, But for you, that's so many pieces. I'm always impressed with that.
It's a juggling act, but
It's also about priorities.
yeah. And uh, I mean, it's very seasonal. Like when you're busy on a tour, well, it's also about trying to like make sure that not everybody else is super slammed, like Lucid playing more one-off stuff, and then that's not competing necessarily from a time.
Oh, I didn't even think about
You
that
know,
aspect, but that's also true.
from
You
a
don't
from a
want your
time
artists to sort of
perspective.
compete against each other.
Yeah, and look, everybody's on their own journey, and everybody has to follow the beat of their own drum, and that's incredibly important. You can't just be like, oh, well, this person's going out, so I'm not going to tour.
But you must think about it's actually kind of something is like dawn on me. You must be thinking about that a lot. And do you ever feel like you're your own worst competitor
Yeah,
sometimes?
very much so. Like, and that's the thing, that's why, like, and I say this on social media a lot, that I feel like yes, a lot of my job is interfacing and acting and talking on the phone and emailing and meetings. But as I grow older, I mean, I just got back from Mexico and I was on vacation, and out of that week, I was actually out in the sand in the ocean for 2 out of the 5 days I was
Yeah.
down there because I was rolling out
Sounds like you.
your
Exactly.
tour. I mean, my wife was not thrilled, but and she gets it. But at the same time,
That's
like,
how you can go on 3 vacations
well,
per
what's
year,
not
too,
free,
maybe.
but yeah, I mean, and that like, but I guess to my point is that as I'm getting older, I'm also understanding that a big part of my job is thinking through and envisioning and planning in my head how to maximize the best time frame and opportunities for my clients. And that doesn't just come from emails, phone. Sometimes it takes days and weeks and months of just sitting, being still, and thinking through and formulating the best plan of attack to then go and do the work.
Yeah.
And, I do think that there's something to envisioning how to get the best out of the process of the work. And, that I think that that's the whole point of vacation is being able to think through those things and just look into the ocean, or go into the forest and do hikes and whatever it is to turn your mind off of the normal status quo of how you normally work, to then allow yourself and feed that different side of the brain to envision how you would like to roll these ventures out.
I mean, I think you're absolutely right. And I think I'm inherently really bad at those things and taking vacations, but it is true. And for the music parts, it also works the same way. Music is an emotional language. If you want to be able to write things that has meaning and a strong message, you better have something to say. How
Yep.
are you going to get something to say? You got to go out in the world and get life experiences.
Yeah, and I, like, as I grow older, I find myself leaning into that. But I posted on my social media the other day. It says, "Embrace the concept that rest, recovery, and reflection are essential parts of progress towards work and a happy life."
Yeah.
And I find that more and more to be so evident that, like, yes, I can be this workhorse and be on the phone and be servicing my clients as best as I can and coming up with concepts and merchandise and press and all these different activations for them, which are all great things. But if we don't have the vision of knowing where we're going,
Yeah.
then we can't go and do the actual implementation of these things to maximize the fruit of what it is.
No, absolutely. I feel personally attacked because I have realized that I think I love working and I work all the time.
I do too.
But I also think it's like driven a little bit by this, like, I feel guilty if I don't work. I think I've always been a little bit like that. And
Yeah.
what you're saying is therefore a little bit it's a good reflection to me, where I was just thinking through that in my own head. It's like, yeah, I could actually go on vacation. Why don't I?
Well,
One thing that actually keeps me is like
from an
in
artist's
this.
perspective, I think in my perspective too, like, where I have the saying of, like, what you kill is what you eat.
Hmm.
Um, Meaning what you put into it is what you get out of it.
Yep.
And for artists, there's this whole concept that probably the normal person doesn't understand, because they go to their job, they do their job. Sometimes they do it bad, sometimes they do it well. But then at the end of it, they punch the fuck out
Yeah.
and they go home and they play Xbox or go to the bar or go
Yeah,
fucking play
I don't
Yahtzee.
really ever
And
punch out.
with an artist, it's tough to turn that off, because you're constantly like, I need to tweet, I need to see what's going on, I need to do a FaceTime, I need to fucking post on stories, and then I got to be creative and write songs. But how in fuck's name am I supposed to write a song if I'm not inspired?
Yeah.
Like, and then as you're going through your social media, looking at these things that hopefully maybe you want to see your friends, maybe you want to be inspired, you then are like, well, this person's playing LA at the Palladium and they're doing this. And then there's this constant fear of like, well, maybe I should be doing that. Then it's like, and the
I mean,
grass is greener, and that's a fucking head fuck.
well, it is two things. On one end, it is never really any happiness at the end of the tunnel from comparing
Yep.
your own life's path with other people.
Yep.
However, personally, I find it as a huge driving force because I am low key pretty competitive. Not competing in terms of who's going to get the most money, but I compete with the quality of my own art. I compete against myself. I try to always do things better. So in a way, seeing other people do well to me is a huge motivator.
Yeah.
Like, oh, I didn't even know that was possible, but now I want that too. I'm Swedish. It's very well known that we have something called Swedish jealousy. And I am very jealous person, but it's never really a harmful thing as long as you don't forget to do this introspection and realize, oh, this is a compass that's showing me what I want. And now I can go after that without being nasty to this
Well,
person who happens to be more fortunate than
and
I
to
am.
be fair, there's people like yourself, and then there's also people that, I mean, some of which I know really well, that simply fall apart at the hem
Yes.
because they have this mindset that they should be given that, they should receive that for all the things that they've done, and they don't, and they
Yeah.
become jaded and angry and bitter.
That's called
and
entitlement,
and
and it's never
you
good.
know, it looks, some people can use it as a motivator, and some people can use it as the thing that is ultimately their downfall.
And I think it boils down to, I know we were supposed to talk about SSKWAN, but this is very interesting, and I also have yet another question too about your management in terms of, the competition. But just to finish this train of thought first, it's it's I think it's a matter of um, abundance thinking versus the scarcity mindset. From my life and what I've seen, there is enough for everyone to be happy and do well. And I rest very assuredly. I'm very sure about that.
Yeah.
So I'm not so worried about other people doing well. I just genuinely am not. I think it's awesome that people are crushing, and it's more motivating for me. But you're right; it's more of a mental, it's more a
Yeah.
mindset. If you are of a scarcity mindset, you think there is a limited amount of resources, there's a limited amount of music that people can enjoy, a limited amount of business ideas. But come on, like if someone can, we can be so successful doing something as niche and weird that we're doing. That's and being me, this weird guy with this, all my personality
Yeah.
quirks and stuff.
Yeah. Yeah.
I can do anything. I mean, I have to say, like, if I know I can do this successfully, come on, like,
Yeah. And look, there's people that can handle that, and then there's people that cannot. And I don't think that there's one that's right or wrong. I think it goes to the mentality of the person, of how they internalize that and what they do with it.
for sure. And that has to do with setting up. It has to do with being clear about what it is that I want to get out of it. It's that whole manifestation formula. It starts with focus. What do I want?
Yeah.
And try to make that as specific as possible and quantifiable. That's how you need to talk to God. You can't talk to God and it's like, I guess I want to be happy. But that's not specific enough.
Yeah.
The more clear you can be, and even if you don't believe in God, it's how you talk to your higher self. Like the more specific you are, the more specific results you're gonna get. It's very logical.
Yeah.
But I wanted to ask you this about managing different clients. Now running two different labels, and you're a very big part of these labels. I mean, you are the day-to-day person. You know more about what's going on than I do to a certain degree.
Mhm.
I'm more of the matrix person who tries to reach out and grab new visions for us to do, like starting this podcast, for example.
Yep.
But when it really comes to brass tacks, like you're a very important person there and you work very hard. So how can you make it so that instead of having your clients or your companies or even your friends' companies, because we know so many people who run other record labels.
Hmm.
How instead of competing with them and making things harder, how can you turn that around? So here I have an asset here. I have all these racehorses or race cars. I have all this amazing platform. There must be a way that you can turn sort of a weakness of doing too much into strength.
Yeah.
And how do you do that?
Um. Well, first off, I think that probably varies per person. Like, I know, I know managers who never ever will have more than 3 clients because they know themselves well enough to know what their threshold for work is.
Yeah, because you start spreading yourself really thin.
Absolutely.
And then it might even be like between the clients that they start getting jealous of each other. You know
Yeah,
what I'm saying?
definitely. And that happens, and I've seen it time and time again. For all I know, it probably is in existence in my own roster. But, you know, look, like, I think that you have to be as respective to what you signed up for with that particular client. Like, when I'm working on Liquid Stranger stuff, it is solely for the intent of making Liquid Stranger as humanly big as possible. And then, in a roundabout way, I have to take off that cap. And if I'm working on Lucid stuff, and Lucid stuff butts against Liquid Stranger stuff, I have to say, fuck Liquid Stranger.
Yeah.
And because that is the fine line of like what I signed up to Neil to be the betterment of his business wing for him. And luckily, like, it's not really like fuck Liquid Stranger. You guys are friends, so you're actually really close. But you have to kind of go into it with those sort of parameters in mind that, like, whether it be my own client that we're fighting against or arguing with, or the opposition, whoever it might be, whether it be from our own camp, our own label, my own roster, which I've had happen where 2 of my clients get offers and they literally, are by different agents and they're both competing and I'm supposed to make a decision. I've had that happen and it's super weird, but it's about being honest and being upfront with all parties involved and trying to do the best for everyone to reach that common denominator and make sure everybody can hopefully get a W out of it. And it's not, we're human. Like, we mess up all the time. I'm not saying by any means I'm perfect at that because I'm most certainly not, but um, it's a very interesting dynamic to be able to kind of navigate, and it's not the easiest. And I think probably to most people, they don't probably realize that.
No, but a couple of what I'm hearing you say is like you need to have first of very good time management skills, and when you work on one client, you go in hard, regardless of how big that artist might be or how much money you take your time for that artist, regardless of where they're at in
Yeah.
their career. And you're actually very good at that, and I know so because I used to be your smallest client.
Yep.
And I think that what saved us in terms of you were actually giving more attention because they had more things going for them to your bigger clients when we first got started.
Yep.
But you were also very clear with the communication. Hey, chill, it's going to be your time. And then I think having bigger clients and therefore having more connections and already existing infrastructure can actually help the smaller client.
Yep.
So as a smaller client, you got to just a little bit chill, be patient, and let things play out. At least that's what I did
I
with you,
think,
and it panned out
and
good for
that
me.
and I think you're spot on with that because a lot of times what I find is that even though artists might be competing in sort of quote unquote the same tier, they're on different cycles and different
Yeah.
wavelengths where, sometimes you're in a process of building so the bottom doesn't fall out from your brand. And so you're building this level of making sure that you have this proper platform. And that is the thing that you're progressing in. And in this scenario, yes, at one point you were my smallest client, and we were building that foundation to make sure that when we put all these components together at the right time, it would create fireworks.
So when you have a lot to do, like I do as an artist at this point, you know, if I don't hear, when I hear from you a lot, but let's say that we didn't talk for a few days, I'd have plenty of stuff to do. But when you are newer to, I think just by the sheer nature of it, you're gonna be more stressed and nervous, and rent is due, and I gotta get this release out. And
Yep.
so, how do you manage those things?
Yeah, it's I mean, like I said, it's kind of like a constant juggling act for sure. And I mean, sometimes you're faster on things and sometimes you're slower on things, but every artist I know is in a different season of life, and they're on a different cycle. Where Veil is not necessarily where Lucid is. Where Lucid is not necessarily where Mize is, and so forth. So it's like you're competing amongst these your peers essentially, and they might get a show and the other person might not, and that's stressful and annoying. But it's also like setting it up to make it so that that's going to come in its time. And you know, my thing as a manager is like creating a lot of infrastructure to be able to prep the client. Um, so maybe they're not going to play Electric Forest this year, but they'll be a dead ringer for next year
So that,
or the following year,
and that's something I
because
find.
we've done those things to get to that place to put it on the radar of the buyer.
I find that very impressive, being able to think several years ahead. And that's like a skill that you definitely have,
Yeah.
which is also makes you perfect as the job as a
And it's
record
something
label
that
executive.
I think you also acquire over time. Just like anything, the more you do it, the more you invest in it, the more you start to learn about yourself and how to best engage, and what needs to go pedal to the metal in that moment, and then when it's best to pump the brakes and be like, no, we need to set this up for the following. And I deal with that daily. Like, show offers, for one, is like a very microcosm of like what that is. It's like, should we play this festival and be second on, comparatively
Hmm.
to should we wait
Yeah.
and be fourth on or fifth on next year? Well, what is coming next year? And like I said earlier, like if you don't have that mindset and vision of like where you're going to be and take that time to think through that process of where you're going to be and what you're on cycle for, well, you might be holding out for something that doesn't exist. Or if you play it that year, you might be selling yourself short, because if you waited, you know, a year, you'd be eighth on and third to close.
So bringing this back to the SSKWAN record label, there came a time where you said, Martin, we need to do this.
Yep.
And for us, just because we do get questions about this and why we decide to do things the way we do, and I always like to share those things
Yeah.
if we think we're onto something good. I think you're very good at this, much better than I am myself. I think, from what I understand, we started this mostly because of scheduling conflicts. Like we
Yeah.
can just simply not take on more on the WAKAAN record label.
Right. In a perfect world, when we started, to put it at face value, we wanted everything to be under the umbrella of WAKAAN. As we progressed on that journey, had more people that wanted to release with us, as opposed to not having those people that were interested, getting great submissions, getting great music in from people that we loved and respected, it became this natural feeling to be like, well, if we kind of split this down the middle and say heavier stuff over here, soft-ish stuff over here, or chill out or funky or futury over here, whatever it is, that's a great way for us to be able to have more opportunity to be able to help. And it has to be within reason of what we can help with.
Hmm.
But if we can, then that's how we should do it. And I don't think that that's anything different than maybe other record labels. Like, with Never Say Die, you had a subsidia kind of label. With most major labels, there's like like imprints and things like that. I mean, even with like Disciple, there's like uh, Black Label or whatever it's called. I forget. Round Table was, I think, the other one that they had, and you start to see this more and more because you kind of want to, either it comes from a place of scheduling conflicts and not having enough space and not wanting to have records like be able to have this shine in this like window where you're focusing solely on that, or it comes from a place of like almost like setting this up in tiers and prestige of like, well, we want the big guys to release on this label, almost like it's your indie major label, as opposite as that is.
Hmm.
But we need to make sure that this has a certain amount of value, so we don't want to dilute it because we get in something cool, but yet this artist is essentially a regional artist.
Hmm.
So some people set it up like that. For us, it wasn't like that. It didn't have anything to do with like a tier or ranking system. It simply had to do with the economics of having space to be able to fit it all in.
Yeah, that's one aspect of it. That's one reason we did this. And the other, I could talk about this for a long time, because I think the other, like, first off, you don't do things just because it's easy. For you, I think going into the down tempo music was kind of a new type of music, a little bit more for you than it was for me. I mean,
Yeah.
you've actually learned a lot about the culture.
Yeah.
And overall, I have to say one thing I'm really impressed with you. Since we got you the really good speakers, how much better your ears have gotten. That's literally something you can train. And I think that's amazing to know that you can get better at basically everything. Like,
Yeah.
you have like trained musician ears now from listening to so many submissions. I'm serious.
I
I
wouldn't
mean,
go that
I
far, but
would be able to tell, and I am. So I'm
it's
telling
funny
you.
though you say that because I did talk to Cannibalist this morning, and I was like, we were talking about the song that she just submitted for SSKWAN, and I was like, it's a really great song, but I was like, I wonder if the kick is maybe a few decibel too quiet. And she was like, huh, I'll I'll go back and listen. I
That's
was
not
like, and
normally.
I was just like, and then after you say that, and I'm just like, well, that was the conversation I had like literally
No, I
two
know.
hours ago.
And you do the same things with me now, and it's also very good feedback. That's the thing. So I guess what I was getting to here is that it's not necessarily so that the starting this new label is just like natural, maybe so much for you. It's a little bit new for me, though. It's almost the opposite. It's like this should have been the label that maybe got started first, just in terms of this has always been the music closest to my heart, the
Yeah.
left field electronica. I don't really like the term, but it's also been called IDM, intelligent dance music.
Yeah.
That's I
I
didn't
would
come up
like to
with
know
that
what
title, but that's
unintelligent dance music is.
electronica, down tempo, chill out,
Yeah.
ambient. Also, SSKWAN, I think, was a place where we wanted to release more organic music. It could be more acoustic music.
Yeah.
Um, but that's been the music that's been the bulk of my own productions. If you think about the
Yeah.
Liquid Stranger
Well,
discography, and I am not super, I
be,
can't even remember, but I think
I have it. Like,
if you think about it, I think like more of my released music is toward that reggae, down tempo, electronica
yeah.
than the hard hitting stuff.
Yeah, and like when we first started, like we just like put all those records out on Wakan because Sisquan hadn't been created. So for us, it was like almost like we had to like definitively decide, oh, this doesn't feel as natural anymore, kind of with what we're doing. And so labels, and I don't think maybe everybody always thinks this, but they also have kind of like it's kind of taken on a life of its own.
Yeah.
And because of that, it's like I mean, that's a great example of sometimes just things that like were kind of like along for just on the ride. That just has like kind of happened. We looked at it as though a spatial issue of needing to have more room to release and help. But after making that decision, it's kind of just taken on more of a meaning of its own organically, where it's like, well, this is what this is, and this is what this is.
Yes, I think, one reason is the scheduling thing. The other reason for myself would also be that I'd love to be more a servant of that culture and try to help instigate a more vibrant live culture for that
Yeah.
type of music.
Well, and we have a lot that we want to talk about and get through on our notes and bullet points of
I'm sure.
Sisquan, but let's actually like pause on this and let's go back to first kind of in answering the question
Hmm.
of Sisquan. We know kind of where it started and why. Explain Wakan, not Wakan, we already know that, but like Sisquan, like where, I mean, because we talked about in an episode that like how hard it was to even come up with a name Wakan. Then start this other label,
Yep.
and we're like, well, fuck, we got to call it something. Sisquan.
Yes, Sasquan is a weird name, right? It's always Wakan, really, and it comes
Yep.
from first. It's my own personal experiences within, my shamanic teacher and mentor that passed so much knowledge to me that I wanted to honor his lineage somehow.
Mm-hmm.
And so Wakan and Sasquan are both names that I learned from him, where Wakan, he interpreted it as the feminine essence of God or the Great Spirit, as they call it, Wakan Tanka. So Wakan is the first part.
Yeah.
Sasquan is the male essence of God. So the more action oriented. So I think it's a kind of a cool play on that. And Wakan came first as the woman, the label, and then Sasquan comes as the brotherly reflection. That's really where the names come from. And that just feels like something that it feels like a good honoring to my mentor personally.
Yeah. So when
But that's what the words mean.
cool, and that, and I think we've touched on that before, but just so everybody has an understanding. So with that, when we made this like conscious decision to kind of split, almost if you will,
Hmm.
into Wakan and then subsequently Sisquan, when that started, was there things that you were like, okay, we now almost like have like a whole new palette to kind of create off of? What is there? What is there something like that you were wanting to like achieve specifically with the label now having like, okay, it's its own standalone
Yes.
thing? What were some of those things?
I think it's a good thing to talk about, because I think that's changed a little bit, and also reality comes knocking at the door. Like, I feel again that the down tempo electronic culture is underrepresented in the live settings in America right now. That's where we live, so that's our primary base, probably all over the world. In favor for the harder dubstep and traps and whatnot.
Yeah.
For on the floor music. So I think that the down tempo music also stands for, it's melodic, heart opening music that I think could be very healthy for people, and also come together in that setting. I think could be a very healing experience for people. Less headbanging and bloody noses on rails and less hard drugs. And you know what I'm saying? It's just how I'm thinking of it. So I
Yeah.
think it's got a little bit of a sanctuary culture. Then from there going into, okay, so it's very utilitarian music. This is music you could meditate to. So we have Light Code, aka LS Dream, who've already put out a couple of projects like that on Sasquan,
Hmm.
which is pure ambient music, where you can listen to and go very deep within yourself. I mean, he's a masterful producer of it too. I
Yeah.
listen to those records here at home a lot, waking up on the wrong side of bed or whatever, and just working with yourself to, okay, let's, what can I do? Meditate, do some pranayama, some breathing exercises, put on the right soundtrack to your life. It changes a lot. Think about a horror movie. You turn off the sound, it's not scary anymore. Think about how much a soundtrack does to any part of your life. And I feel like the downtempo music has a very, very big place there. It's
So
utilitarian. It's music for yoga, music for meditation, music for, I have problems sleeping and winding down at night.
mhm.
And so no Jarbas after a certain time now.
Yeah,
That's
yeah.
definitely. But the other part of it is I'm just an anxious person. I overthink everything, and having on some relaxing music as opposed to like laying like obsessing over Twitter or some big ass action movie. I have to think about those things in my private life.
Yeah.
I
And
have to program myself and be very conscientious with my surroundings, what I'm listening to, because that affects how I behave and feel as a person.
right. Let me ask this, like, how do you interpret what we classify as SSKWAN releasable music? Like, what does that, like, what sort of genre from here to here? What
Yeah.
does that encompass?
So yeah, I've never been a huge fan of genres and trying to pigeonhole music. I also understand why, because that makes it easier to find it and it's good for journalists. And
Yeah.
as an artist, it becomes kind of useless. For a person like myself, creating stuff, it doesn't really work like that to create music. It's more chaotic inspiration. It's a wild beast. You grab onto it. Oh, this is what came out. At least for myself, I don't.
Yeah.
But I think just a wide description of the, because I don't even want to use like say ambient. It's sort of limited. It's very like soundscapey music without any drums. But I say something that's a little more organic and melodic, maybe a little deeper. And thinking about, again, going back to the utilitarian aspect, meaning that it's useful for something. It's like you pair that music with an activity in your life. There's not always you want to rage out to dubstep, you know what I'm saying,
Yeah.
or drum and bass or any of these things. I mean, I love going playing those shows and I love making that music, but you cannot always be on that gear.
Yeah.
You cannot
Well,
just
I think a lot
always.
of people I know, kind of classify SSKWAN as like anything from organic feeling to acoustic to down tempo to
Exactly.
electronica to chill out to
But it could be
ambient.
psychedelic, even softer rock or indie
Yeah.
poppy stuff. I'm a huge fan of myself. I don't want to say that we just work within a certain genre as much as it's a certain aesthetic of the music, more organic, more melodic, laid back, easy on the ears.
Less drops.
Yeah, and even if there are, because that's a production technique on how you can in work with contrast in music. So that happens in all kinds of music that you have ramping. It happens in classical music a lot that you have ramping staccato, like big sections followed by softer sections, and it leads up to. So classical music from Beethoven has drops in a sense too.
Yeah.
We just call them different things, but more the aesthetic of it being able to be a soundtrack to a nice drive in Sedona, looking over the desert or meditating.
So when you're driving over Sedona, what artists kind of have inspired you to continue on this journey of making that kind of music?
I mean, this is really the music I feel that I started making myself. The very first music I made when I was just 7, 8 years old. I was definitely inspired by early other acts that did, like Tangerine Dream is a huge inspiration of mine. Um, Brian Eno, who did a lot of work with David Bowie
Mm-hmm.
as a, songwriter, and he was also a very good backing vocalist. But he, on the side, started really the ambient music culture, which was more soundscapes. It was more recording nature and putting some very etheric little pads on there or something. He's got an album called Music for Airports, for example. It's very worthwhile going back and listening through that if you're into that type of aesthetic. It's very abstract music, really no drums. It's very floaty and very psychedelic. But I
Right.
listened to those things very early, and then of course, one of my absolute favorite artists is Aphex Twin. And he's a very diverse artist. From drillcore, super hard drum and bass, and crazy shit too. Having released two wonderful albums, the Selected Ambient Works 1 and 2, I highly recommend people going checking out. All that came out on a label that I think also is probably like my favorite record label. It's called Warp Records, but also affiliate labels like Aphex Twins label, Reflex Records, or Ninja Tune, Mowax. Um, that's still music I grew up with. So it wasn't really artists who did just one thing. Like again, Brian Eno, he did everything from music with Bowie to this kind of thing, and Aphex Twin was all over the place. But they had that side of them,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And that inspired me as a producer. Like, yeah, we're humans. We have different feelings. We have a lot of different things. Like at night, I like this. At morning, I want to drink my coffee, but I don't drink it right before bed. I mean, we're all different, and so that music really inspired me. A lot of beautiful, lovely acts that came out on like Warp, for example, Plaid, who I think is one of the boards of Canada. I
Mm.
mean, amazing music that's truly inspired me. Um, in my life, not just within like, that gave me inspiration to write music, but just made me want to live as a human because
Yeah.
it's so dope.
One, and I think a lot of these kind of acts have kind of like made it so that it has kind of like paved the way
Oh, for
for
sure.
kind of like what we're kind of doing
Oh yeah,
now.
we should definitely tip the hat to
Yeah.
Warp Records, Reflex Records, Planet Mu. That's a music's label. Uh, Mike Pardina's, Mowax. I feel like I'm repeating myself
Yeah.
here. There are also like a lot of Mille Plateau is another label. I believe it's French. They released a lot of minimal techno, but also beautiful. That's been a culture, and I don't know if maybe Europe has been on the forefront of it. I don't. I'm European, so I don't even think about that. But I grew up with that in the '90s. You know what I'm saying? Like
Yeah.
that was a really strong era for that type of music. Today, people should really look into the glitch scene in Japan and over in Asia. It's been going for a long time, but also another amazing take on a very glitchy, noisy pops and clicks kind of approach to ambient and electronica.
Yeah.
Um,
And now too, I think some of that is like, I guess the Americanized version
oh yeah,
of some of that would be, your Spongles and
for sure.
um
Even though Spangle is from Britain too, so
yeah, but like I mean, I think he's far bigger
but
over
where is
here.
Odessa from?
My assistant Bree would know. I not a clue. I guess we could
Is
call
there
you.
a huge act that
Yeah.
actually has been able to do something really cool with music that still has a more soft, dreamy aesthetic? You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So it can actually. I have a huge respect for them and what they've been able to build. It's like
Yeah.
really beautiful music, but it's not really in your face. It's like slapping you around, like forcing you to do
Well,
stuff.
I mean,
It's
I mean, even your agent, not, and I don't know if most people would know this, but like you have two agents that book your shows.
Mhm.
One of them is Cody, and the other one is Jay.
Yeah.
Jay is like arguably the guy, effectively, in that world. He
Yep.
does Odessa, Jai Wolf, and all those kind of
Yeah.
acts.
So there are
And
definitely another
and
person.
he likes them,
Yeah.
and he also likes you.
But
So there's
another.
very much a parallel there.
Yeah. So in that regard, we're riding on a very beautiful already existing culture
Yeah.
that's been going for many many years. Another person like contemporary that I do want to bring up that I have a huge respect for, and I think that hard work pays off, is Closey.
Yeah.
Because she hasn't compromised on her style, and yeah, she has a couple. There's a little oomph in her music, but it's also very melodic and ethno kind of world based music.
Yeah.
So there are definitely people in today's generation doing incredibly well. I think Ellis Dream might be tapping into that a little bit. You know,
Hmm.
he has that little side of it too.
Yeah.
Um,
But there's but there's it's funny because like to me, it's like for us, it's when we play shows like that, we always feel like those kind of shows have a very unique time and a place,
I
at
mean,
least for what we do. But then there's guys like Tipper who, that's what he does. And he is arguably, I guess he would probably right now be the biggest in this like very more abstract
mhm.
experimental
But if you
type
know
thing.
Tipper, he's my age, or maybe okay, that's not important, maybe, but he's been around for a very long time,
Yeah.
and he used to do very experimental new school breaks. Those did not used to be. I mean, it was pretty hard hitting music. He
Yeah.
had a phase when he was younger and out playing more shows where he
Yeah.
was doing harder stuff, and then he's gone over more and more to doing this. Very organic electronica layered. He's a very good producer and engineer, so like his music is very clean and big. Um,
It kind of feels like there's kind of like a bubbling and a kind of like a resurgence of this kind of being more inserted in modern day
mhm.
music, which, like even when we were talking about the small idea of like SSKWAN, we were like, who we don't even know like if anybody will want to
Well,
hear these kind of records.
yes.
And now, even in the past, 3 years, we've seen kind of it, you know,
No,
really start to blow from like Charles the First and doing that, and of the trees, and some of these other guys that have kind of like taken that, Freddie
hmm
Todd, and kind of run with this in their own lane. And, and then it's funny because it's like we look at that and it's like, I'm sitting here looking at your catalog of down tempo electronic stuff that you've done, and I would venture to say probably even in your own catalog, it's probably at this point 60%, maybe 65% more
have you thought of
that kind of genre than heavy music.
yeah? Have you thought of maybe it's time to do a best of Liquid Stranger down tempo at some point, especially since some of those releases seem to, despite our best efforts, uploading them to Spotify, they
Yeah.
get
Yeah.
disappear from there.
we've
Like
we've uploaded the we've uploaded the Arcane Terrain
a
for
bunch of
four
times, yeah.
times,
And it just keeps
and it keeps disappearing on
yeah.
Spotify for I don't know, whatever reason. Strike. They
It's a
tell me something
side
different
note,
every time.
but a lot of my
I think
albums are
that's a
all over
really
the
good idea.
place. Yeah, because I think like a lot of my albums, there are a few albums that is like one thing. They're usually because I'm just too scatterbrained as a producer, so I get bored fast. So I've done a soft song, no, a really hard song,
Yeah.
and I want to do a tango
Yeah.
song. But to put like the best stuff in the same place, maybe with some remixes or something, I think we should start thinking about some type of
Could be cool.
legacy record like this, so we can find it in the same place and actually find it in the first place. I don't know what they're doing over there, but that's something that every day I get hit up by
Yeah.
people wondering where are the
Well,
records.
in 2007, let's just go back and
Hmm
trace it. 2007, The Invisible Conquest. 2009, Intergalactic Slapstick.
hmm
2010, Steel Trap.
hmm
2011, The Arcane Terrain. 2014, Renegade Crusade. Now, I don't know if I would
But all those,
qualify this as like maybe like a down tempo or electro, but like definitely electronica would be Anomaly, the collection, because that
yeah,
was that year that we put out
yeah,
like
for sure.
fucking, I don't know, I think like
Did you?
9 EPs in a row or some shit.
Yeah, and it's mainly if it's not like down tempo, it's still more organic music,
Yeah.
more influenced by island music, Caribbean music, reggae,
Yeah.
dancehall, that type of stuff, which is a huge influence.
Well, even and I don't think probably many people know this because, they want to Space Boss and Gunslinger and all these other songs, but like your arguably biggest song on the internet is Dissolve.
Yeah, and then under that, I think I won most downloaded reggae song in 2011 with Bombaclad Star, but
Yeah.
that's not the most requested songs for. So that's an interesting thing, and I think that's exactly. And maybe we've been harping on this, I don't know, but my journey is very interesting because I consider myself probably being a little better at that and more at home doing the beautiful electronica stuff. But due to the fact that I also like being out playing shows and being active there, I make other stuff. That stuff has started resonating with people. I care because you do. So if you care more about that, I'll make more.
Yeah.
And that's how the Psychonauts and the Gunslinger. So I've written about, and don't get me wrong, it's fun, but it's
Yeah.
just one side
Well,
of.
and to be fair, all these records that I just listed, all of them are experimental, down tempo, whatever the fuck
Yeah,
you want to call it.
mostly.
But then in it was about Weird and Wonderful in 2018, 17, somewhere in there.
Hmm.
That was one thing that we kind of made a conscious effort to do, was to say we have this over here and we have this over here,
Hmm.
and it started to collectively kind of merge together. So
That was.
basically, on from Weird and Wonderful
Hmm.
forward, most of your records have been a collaborative thing that have a little bit of
That was your idea and a very, very good idea because, like, on one end, I had this very obscure left field electronica and this obnoxiously hard, just on the
yeah,
other side of the coin, kind of pubescent, obnoxious dubstep, kind of silly. And to merge those two, and what would
yeah,
that sound like? And that's something I still live by somehow. Like, how can I make something that could still be playable? Like my next down tempo EP for SSKWAN, my first release on SSKWAN is called Unity, and it's right now in mastering. It's got 6 songs. All those songs are produced just like how I produce dance music, meaning the drums are in the front, smacking. Of course, the sounds of the drums are not super harsh, distorted, but it's danceable. It's got a big sub in it. Um, so it's also those production techniques. It's not necessarily that you have to compromise on the type of music, but the way you make it.
Okay, so we've talked about Sasquan quite a bit. I mean, we were on a journey. We deviated, talked about a lot of life shit. It was awesome. And yeah, so we need to be at a place to stop. We're going to come back with a part 2, and talk about a lot more Sasquan stuff, talk about another record from Liquid Stranger, talk about a compilation, all in another episode regarding Sasquan. See you next time.